we are in a problem position. A unipolar world, U.S. on top, is becoming a multipolar world, contesting empires. And not just the U.S. and China, Europe, as I tried to suggest, trying to find some way to survive in this multipolar world. But that means that the U.S. empire is in decline. We can dance and pretend all we want around it, try to keep up the denial. But if you remember that denial didn't work well for all those other empires, you might at least open the possibility that it's not working well for us either. The American empire is now over. The powers of people who have lived through the decline of empires to not see the decline of their empire is stunning. If you want the greatest example now, just go to England. They still haven't figured it out, half of them, that empire is, even though literally it's gone, all that's left is to send the children of the king or queen periodically to a place like, I don't know, Kenya, and have them hand out British flags to little children who give them bouquets, and then they leave. That's it. The shell of a performance that nobody takes seriously. Anyway, the American empire is over. The American empire is founded on an American capitalism that is in a new declining phase. And here's my argument. It is shaping the consciousness of the American people. Everyone, in different ways, it is having double the effect because it can't be spoken. Every psychologist will tell you, trauma is a bad thing to have in your life. A trauma that you cannot talk about. The only hope to ameliorate it, to soften its impact, is have it talk about it. Talk about it with your parents, talk about it with a relative, talk about it with a psychologist, talk about it with a therapist. You've got to get, sooner or later, or to say the same thing in another aphorism that psychologists like. You want to get over it? The only way over it is to go through it. You have to do that, which is painful and difficult, makes people shy away. Anyway, that's my argument. My argument is that whether you're trying to understand Trumpism or MAGAism, that's what you're looking at. You're looking at the working class coming to terms slowly, painfully, with as much resistance as they can muster to facing this. They don't want to see it. Look, part of me empathizes about who wants to be, I'm in the middle of a declining empire. You don't want this. You want people who will distract you from that because it's a nagging worry already in the back of your mind. You have occasional dreams about it. You have occasional moments when a story on a newspaper, image flashing across your internet screen, that might be going on. The war in Ukraine is lost. In America, not yet. It's lost. Literally, I watched the New York Times or the Washington Post, the losing army, desperate to hold on to whatever support it can get from the West, takes a group of its military, which it has a shortage of, and makes a break into an undefended part of Russia. Course, if you're following, that's pointless, it's hopeless, has nothing to do with war. The desperation is written all over it. It'll be over in 2 weeks. Now, I read French and German newspapers. I have an advantage. With the internet, I can read in my own other languages as easy as I can pick up an American paper. Here it is. The level of propaganda is horrific. But people should remember, propaganda, like everything else, rises and falls. You need propaganda. In the middle of a war, you need to mobilize your people so the enemies are awful, horrible monster beasts, and you are beautiful vanilla. I get that. But we all get it, right? We understand in a war, you have to we're all together. But there's a pattern to propaganda, which the literature on the subject has made very clear. And one of the key sources of propaganda is weakness. You're losing the situation, and you comfort yourself, just like eating too much or 100 other ways that we comfort ourselves if we're under too much stress. For a country that had 75, maybe 100 years of global dominance, certainly since the Second World War, but even earlier, but certainly since so that's a long 75 years, roughly, right? So total dominance. I mean, nobody was close. I explained to people, because I'm an economist, The Soviet Union was never an economic competitor of the United States. I give them a statistic because Americans don't know, because they could find it out in 2 seconds. What is a GDP? You know, the GDP gross, right? It's a rough economics measure of the size of an economy, the footprint, total output of goods and services in a calendar year. So the GDP of the United States right now, $24 trillion. The GDP of Russia right now, $1.5 trillion. Do you understand? To think of the Soviet Union as an economic competitor means you're ignorant. China is the new empire. That's it. It's over. It's been over for 10, 15 years, and it becomes more over every minute. It's a phenomenon that is in no way hidden and in no way difficult to discern. I'll give you an example. This year, like every one of the last 30, the GDP is growing faster in China than here, usually double or triple. This year, the United States will grow 2.5%. China will grow 5%. That's the normal relationship. Been going on for a generation. It's over. It's just over. There is a question. The Chinese say they don't want an empire. Now, on the one hand, that could be unbelievable wisdom. Could be, especially in China, because they had an empire once. They actually are looking at the second time. The United States never had that. It's a new situation. They want a multipolar world. Xi Jinping says it. He says it repeatedly, and he doesn't say it with a twinkle in his eye. Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but maybe we're on the cusp of a different way of organizing the world. We don't have the American Empire, the British Empire, the Dutch Empire, Persian Empire, Greek Empire, Roman Empire. Maybe not, but the American Empire is over, and there's no precedent here. Nobody has prepared the American people. What do you do if the ride up, which was a good ride for 75 years, rising standard of living, whatever it is, all of these things are now. And it comes from the change in the world economy. The G7, U.S. and its major allies, is now a smaller aggregate GDP than the BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. That's the original BRICS, they're 20 years old. And they have recently been joined by 6 other countries, including Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and some others. And there are about a dozen that have applied, more or less. The BRICS is already aggregate GDP larger than the G7. Now, why is this important? Because every country's leaders, whether they are right-wing, left-wing, they're all readjusting to what? To the changing world economy. If you're a small African country and you need to build a railroad, it used to mean you would go to London, New York, Paris, and hope and ask and see if they'll bring their bankers to meet with you and you could arrange a loan to develop your country. If you're having trouble selling your product, where would you go? If you have your trouble buying, where would you? Now everybody has a second option. You don't have to go west, you go east, go to New Delhi, go to Beijing. Why? They have more money. I'm exaggerating, but it doesn't have much to do with ideology. Not much. It has to do with a changing world economy. And even if you're a partisan of one or the other, you don't want to be left out of, Emmanuel Macron, the leader currently of France, who's on his way out. His people have rejected him totally. But before that happened, he made noises he wanted to join the BRICS. They turned him down, by the way. They don't need him. The Americans don't get it. When the war in Ukraine breaks out, the Russians invade Ukraine, the United States decides that the way to handle this, to defeat the Russians quickly, is by imposing on the greatest, the mother of all sanctions. We won't buy Russian oil and gas. Russia depends heavily on oil and gas, which it has a lot of, and exporting it to Europe, which is a consumer. If you understand modern Europe, it's the core of modern Europe's economic success. Cheap Russian energy. And that flows directly until they blow up the pipeline to Germany. So Germany has, after the war, which decimates it, which is German for miracle of economics, the recovery of Germany. Germany becomes the economic powerhouse of Europe. Okay, a lot of truth to that, but a dependence on cheap Russian oil and gas. Okay, so the plan is we won't buy it anymore from you. You'll collapse. Your country will fall apart. Not only will you lose the war in Ukraine, but the West will come and carve you up which could never be any more important than those Kazakhstan, those countries. That's serious. Biden speaks that way. Blinken, the state secretary, speaks that way. Jake Sullivan, the security advisor, they all speak that way. They believed that. That was all wrong. Russia didn't collapse. What happened? They didn't understand the change in the world because they're lost in the make-believe that it's not over. They didn't understand BRICS. What did the Russians do? They went to their allies, Russia and China. Will you buy the oil that we can't sell to Europe? Done. Deal. No problem. Game over. They couldn't see this coming? They don't know what you know? Of course they know. When the United States, as a corner colony of Britain, decides it wants to do things its own way, the British come down and say, you can't. And the Americans, half of them take it, the other half are pissed off. So then we have a war. But it's very important. The British go to war against the United States, their own colony, to say to the colony, you are not going to go your own way. You're going to do what we tell you. George III, King, sits in England, and George Washington sits here. And the British, to everybody's amazement, including George Washington's, lose the war. 1812, they try again. They fail again, and they reach a conclusion. And so they work out a live and let live deal with their colony, even though they're competitors in many ways. We can work something out, and they do. That will become the American strategy toward China. But it's not speakable yet. And you know, the first politician who says it, and says it clearly, will be the next president, because it'll be understood, however bitterly, as the best way to go, as it was in England. They didn't like it, they hated it, then they did it. And this country will too, because what the is the alternative? Nuclear war? Really? You want to do that? Endless of these proxy wars? And by that I include the one in the Middle East, about to explode. Absurd games in the South China Sea around Taiwan. So I think all of these are, to bring it back, consequences flowing out of a changed world economic arrangement, which can be summarized in a lot of ways: the arrival of the BRICS, the emergence of China, the decline of the American empire. There are a lot of different ways of categorizing or characterizing what's going on, just as there are many ways in which it shapes the American consciousness. I think Americans are very distressed. They get it. There's a reason why MAGA is the slogan. Why? Make America great. They know that there was something lost. The war in Vietnam, forget everything else. It was lost. We lost. The war in Iraq, we lost. The war in Afghanistan, we lost. You know, if you go back and you read Gibbon or anybody else on the decline of the Roman Empire, they call them Vandals, barbarians coming from the Central European steppes that were ripping apart Roman Empire. We sent 500,000 people to Vietnam. We lost. Communist country. In a way, I think that Trump was the first to cash in on this. There's something terribly wrong in this country, and I'm not like the others who pretend it isn't there. I'm not Bush. I'm not Clinton. I'm going to say naughty things. I think they loved him for that. Many still do. But you know something? That goes nowhere. Never did. And so they don't want that anymore. They're enough with that. And the poor Trump, he's going right down the tubes now because he's stuck with the persona that had its moment. People are really frightened more and more. They want a cheery person. Not one. And they're going to go for her because she's cheery. She's happy. She's energetic. This image of the two old men in a race to see whose cognitive decline will be quicker. That's the image of the empire. Those two old men having trouble walking up an incline. She's brown and she's going to do it. And he's a nice guy who coaches football. I hope somebody will come along and say, we need to make a deal between the rich and the poor. And they both are going to have to. What we've had so far is we've had the rich and the powerful in a declining empire using their wealth and power to hold on. And you know what that means? They're offloading the cost of a declining empire on the middle and lower classes. That can't go on. I'm the champion, but I'm saying to the rich and powerful, we're going to take a chunk of what you got. But if we don't, then everything will be lost. And they'll buy it, because they'll be by that time frightened by enough Ukrainians. They'll buy it. Or they won't. And if they won't, then they'll have to have a straight-out fascist to hold on to the middle and the bottom. That's over then, too, which kind of they also know. So they're in a very tough place. I won't be around to see it. You will, but it's a tough place.
For most of the last 75 years, since the end of World War II, the United States has been the dominant player in the world economy. It produced the most goods exported around the world. It brought in the most imports from around the world. The U.S. currency, the dollar, was the global currency held by central banks in virtually every country as security, as collateral, you might say, for their own currencies. The American economy dominated also because the American military was the strongest in the world, and the political power of the United States was unrivaled at the time.
The American empire is now over.